April 14, 1912, 11:40 p.m. The ship changed its breathing before anyone noticed the water. I was standing below deck, in a passageway where the walls always felt slightly damp, and the lights never fully reached the corners. It wasn't a place meant for passengers, just a corridor between work and silence. You didn't walk there unless you had a reason, and even then, you walked quickly. The vibration beneath my boots shifted, not stopped, not slowed, wrong. At first, I blamed myself. Fatigue makes honest things feel suspicious. After days at sea, you start hearing patterns in noise that isn't there. Pipes expand, plates settle. The ocean presses on steel the way a thumb presses on a bruise. But this wasn't the ship settling. This was the ship changing. Up above, the band was still playing. You could feel music travel through the hull, a faint, steady pulse, like the Titanic was humming along with it. There was laughter, too, a bright kind of laughter that made you forget how cold the Atlantic truly was. I imagined men leaning back in upholstered chairs, women letting their gloves rest on the edge of crystal glasses, as if the night owed them peace. Down where I stood, peace was already leaving. I placed my hand against the wall. The metal was colder than it should have been, not from the air, from contact with something that did not belong inside the ship. Water doesn't rush in at first. It tests. It listens. It finds the smallest weaknesses and pushes gently until the weakness becomes an opening, a seam, a rivet, a promise made too confidently. That was when I knew. The Titanic wasn't wounded. It was compromised. People imagine disasters as explosions, screams, running, a single moment where everything turns. They're wrong. Real disasters begin quietly, when the systems meant to protect you start lying. A steward passed me with a smile that was too practiced. His shoes were damp, the edge of his trouser leg darker than it should have been. He was speaking to two third-class passengers in a soft voice, repeating the same sentence like a prayer. "Nothing to worry about," he said. "Just a precaution. Please return to your rooms." Behind him, water crept along the floor in a thin sheet, so shallow you might have mistaken it for cleaning. It moved with patience. It carried no sound of violence, just the faintest whisper as it slid over steel. No alarm yet, no shouted orders, just the suggestion to wait. And people did. Waiting is easy, when nothing looks broken, when no one around you is shouting the truth. I moved deeper, toward the section where the sounds changed. You could tell where you were by how the ship spoke. Near the engines, everything vibrated with purpose. In the quiet corridors, the ship sounded like a sleeping animal. Tonight it sounded like something waking up. A man at a junction looked at me as I passed. Crew, young, barely old enough to wear the uniform with confidence. His eyes flicked to the floor, then away, like he didn't want to admit what he was seeing. "You feel it?" I asked. He nodded once. That was all he could afford. A longer answer would have made it real. Minutes later, the first door closed, not slammed, not locked, simply closed. A door meant to separate classes, meant to separate comfort from discomfort, now separating air from water. I watched the steward pull it shut with care, as if quietness could keep the ocean polite. Above us, I heard new sounds: metal scraping, canvas shifting, lifeboats being uncovered. The ship was still moving forward, and that detail mattered more than anyone understood. Movement convinces people they are safe. As long as the world keeps moving, the mind insists the story cannot end. I turned down another cord. The lights flickered, then steadied, as if the Titanic itself was reluctant to admit weakness. The air smelled different, colder, sharper, carrying something like wet iron. In the lower sections, men worked with their sleeves rolled up. They weren't panicking. Panic belongs to people with options. These men had tasks. They had training. They had routine. Even with water at their ankles, they moved like the rules of the world still applied. Someone shouted a number. Someone else answered with another number. "How long?" one man asked, wiping water from his forearm, as if it were sweat. "How fast is it coming?" another asked, voice flat. No one answered, not because they didn't know, but because saying the truth out loud would rearrange the entire ship. And then I saw him. He stood near a junction of corridors, dressed too well to belong there. First class by the cut of his coat, by the shine of his cufflinks. Even in this dim light, his hands were clean, his shoes untouched by water. He had wandered into the wrong world, and was standing in it as if he'd paid admission. He wasn't afraid. He was attentive, watching the water rise the way one watches a clock run out. The steward approached him, breathing quickly but holding his posture as if posture alone could preserve authority. "Sir," the steward said, gesturing toward the stairs, "there's room." For now, the man nodded once, as if he already understood the offer. Then he stepped back, not because he was told to, because he chose to. The steward hesitated. No training prepared him for a refusal delivered calmly. "You should go," he said again, quieter, almost personal. "I know," the man replied. He didn't explain himself. He didn't announce a moral. He didn't seek an audience. Explanations are for people who intend to be understood. I watched him look past the steward, past me toward the deeper part of the ship, where the air was colder and the work was harder. Then he turned and walked the opposite direction of survival. It wasn't dramatic. That's the part that stayed with me. People think courage is loud. They think it comes with a speech. They think it looks like a raised fist and a final stare. But real courage is often silent and deeply inconvenient. It doesn't ask to be remembered. It just moved. The ship listed a little more. A plate somewhere groaned. A sound like a giant exhale rolled through the steel. The lights trembled again. Somewhere above, the music stopped. Not gradually, not politely. Stopped. That was the moment denial finally drowned. Suddenly the corridors filled with motion. Footsteps from above. Voices carrying new edges. Men calling instructions without fully believing in them. The steward who had been smiling earlier walked past again, his smile gone now, replaced by a tight line of determination that looked almost like anger. "Up," he shouted. "Everyone up now." The difference between please and now is where disasters live. People began moving. Families clustered. But even then, there was no screaming. Not yet. Screaming comes later, when the body catches up to what the mind has already accepted. I followed the flow upward. The stairs felt narrower. The air grew colder with every step. The ship's tilt was subtle enough to deny if you wanted to. But your body didn't lie. Your weight shifted. Your shoulder brushed the railing more than it should. The Titanic was becoming unfamiliar. Halfway up, I saw a mother adjusting her child's coat. The child looked confused, not frightened, like this was a game with rules. Adults refused to explain. The mother's hands were steady. Her face was pale in the weak light, but her voice was calm. "Hold my hand," she said, and the child did. Behind them a man argued with a steward. My wife is up there," he insisted. The steward didn't answer the way a person answers a question. He answered the way a person repeats an order. "Keep moving." The man took one step, then stopped, like stopping could bargain with the night. Then finally, he moved again, head down, jaw clenched, walking as if each step cost him something. When I reached a higher corridor, the contrast hit me like a slap. Carpet, warmer lights, air that smelled like perfume instead of wet iron. A different world pretending it could remain separate. And yet, even here, the ship was leaning. I passed doors with ornate handles, past framed decorations, still straight-on walls that should have felt wrong. People stood in clusters, dressed for an evening they were refusing to end. A woman with a jeweled necklace was asking a question that sounded absurd in the air. "Is this truly necessary?" she said, as if necessity was a rumor. A man beside her laughed, too loudly. "It's a precaution," he insisted, to no one in particular. Nothing more. But his eyes kept flicking toward the nearest stairwell. In that look, denial and fear lived together. On deck, the cold was immediate. The kind of cold that isn't just temperature. It's a warning. The sky was clear, stars sharp enough to feel like they could. The ocean looked calm, which made everything worse. Calm water makes death look polite. I saw lifeboats being prepared, men with ropes, hands moving fast, officers shouting numbers, women being guided forward. Some women resisted, not because they were brave, but because they were unwilling to step into the unknown. A lifeboat looks small when you're standing next to a ship that claims to be unsinkable. I watched one woman grip the railing and refuse to let go. "My husband is here," she said. "I won't leave him." Her husband stood behind her, face stiff, eyes wet but refusing to spill. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Go," he said. "Please." He wasn't commanding, he was begging. She shook her head once, stubborn as a child. The officer raised his voice. "Ma'am, now." The husband's hand tightened. Finally she moved. Step by step, like each step was a betrayal. She climbed into the lifeboat and sat down without looking back. The husband watched her go. He didn't wave. Waving is for people who believe in reunion. A few feet away, two young men joked loudly, trying to turn fear into performance. Their laughter sounded thin. It didn't reach their eyes. "Imagine the headlines," one of them said. Grin forced. "The Titanic, delayed," the other laughed. Then his laugh broke halfway through, like his throat had realized the truth before his mind did. I looked back toward the deck house and saw the man in the fine coat again, briefly, moving along the edge of the crowd, not stepping into the lines for boats, not seeking attention. He was heading toward the darker side of the ship, where fewer people stood. I followed, not too close, just enough to keep him in sight. He stopped near a group of crewmen. One of them spoke quickly, pointing toward a lifeboat that had space. The man listened, nodded once, and stepped away. Again, a crewman grabbed his arm, not harshly, desperately. "Sir, there's room," the crewman insisted. "You can." The man looked at his hand on his sleeve, then up at the crewman's face. "I know," he said. Same words as before, different weight now, because now the truth was everywhere. The ship was visibly lower in the water. The angle was no longer subtle. People's voices were sharper. The air tasted like smoke, like steam, like cold metal. There was no more pretending, and yet he refused. He turned and spoke quietly to the crewman, words I couldn't fully hear over the wind. The crewman's expression changed, not softened, not relieved, changed into something like understanding. The crewman let go. The man walked away. He vanished into the moving crowd. And I realized something then that unsettled me more than the cold. Not everyone was fighting to live. Some people were choosing how to die, not for drama, not for legend, for reasons they would never explain, for people they would never name. The ship groaned again, a deep sound, the kind of sound that makes your teeth vibrate. Somewhere below deck, something heavy shifted. The crowd reacted like an animal. A surge, a gasp, a wave of bodies pressing closer to the boats. Officers shouted louder. Men tried to hold lines that were dissolving. Women climbed into boats faster now, less resistant. Children were passed over arms, like fragile packages. A man in a worker's coat, third class, maybe crew, pushed his way forward, carrying a small child. The child's face was streaked with tears and salt air. "Please," the man said. "Please, take him." An officer looked at the child, then at the man. For a second the officer's face cracked. Just a second, showing a human under the uniform. "Put him in," he said. The man lifted the child into the boat. Then the man stepped back. The officer reached for him. "You too." The man shook his head. He didn't smile. He didn't perform. He simply said, "No," and stepped away into the cold. That was when I understood the real story of that night. Not the iceberg, not the ship, the decision. The quiet moments, where a person looked at a door called survival and chose not to walk through it. History will always count the dead. It will always list the survivors, but it will never fully capture the seconds between. It will never write down the moment. A father decides his child's life matters more than his own, and doesn't ask for applause. It will never record the moment a stranger gives away warmth, and keeps only the cold. And it will never name the man in the fine coat, who refused, again and again, as if his refusal was the only control he had left. The Titanic tilted further. The sea rose like it had been waiting patiently for permission. People began to scream then, some screams of fear, some of rage, some of disbelief. The ship's lights still burned, making everything look like a stage. That was the cruelest part. The Titanic was lit like a celebration while it died. I stood near the rail and watched a lifeboat lower into the black, faces turned upward, eyes wide, watching the ship they had trusted become something monstrous. I watched the ropes strain. I watched hands grip wood until knuckles turned white. Then the boat dropped, the last few feet hard, sending a spray of freezing water into the air.